This is the final video in this short series about how we could actually make our lives better if we would follow the principles that we say we believe in, such as being mindful of nature, being good custodians of what we've been given, and not going crazy about progressivism and the future and utopia. We don't really need that. We can use what we have and use our common sense and our native decency. I've been suggesting that we could do things like just grow food and not live like kings, but we could have we could have much more health and uh, feel the rhythm of life and understand the limits of life and be happy in a way that we can't seem to be right now. As I'm making this video today, a lot of things have been canceled or suspended around me because we're so terrified of the coronavirus. Sickness, of course, is part of life. It's always with us, and yet we don't seem to know how to deal with any sort of natural contingency like this. And what I want to talk about in this final episode here is all of the unnatural things that we've introduced into our existence that complicate matters further and perhaps make us so paranoid, hysterically paranoid about just natural limitation. Maybe all the technology that we have has convinced us that we don't have limits. I think it has in many respects, and so when we encounter some of those hard limits, we don't know how to handle it. I think there's a great irony in my making this on an iPhone, and I'm going to upload it to YouTube. So I'm using electronic technology, obviously, but the title of this one is Escape from Electrotopia. Topos, of course, is the Greek word for a place, and boy, do we live in that place today. Everything is electric around us. We're saturated in EMR, electromagnetic radiation. And I've heard many people who are kind of off the academic grid, who are not spokesmen for some big company or government agency, actually talk about, and these are knowledgeable people, professional engineers, physicists, people who understand how electricity works, medical people sometimes, although even the medical establishment, I'll talk about that in a minute, but EMR is, we don't really know what it is doing to us in most cases. We have something new that comes down the pike and it's really cool. It does something that is easily marketable, so it's good for the economy. Everybody wants one, and then of course it's upgraded as fast as the system can possibly sustain. And that's more money in the system, and it's good for jobs and so on and so forth. But we're not spending any time looking around the edges and seeing what the long-term effects of this stuff might be. We don't really know how it affects our health, and certainly our happiness is influenced by our physical health as much as by anything. I think a lot about the late Neil Postman. That was his name, Postman. Uh, he was the preeminent scholar in my book. I used to teach a lot of his essays in my classes about the effects of technology on our lives. He was no more than I am a Luddite. He's not saying we should not have technology in our existence. Again, I wouldn't be making this video if it weren't for electronic technology. But Postman's thesis again and again was just that we should look before we leap. Instead of gobbling this stuff up as quickly as it can be marketed, we should ask, do we really need this? What do we need it for? What's the best way to target its development so that it addresses this need that we've identified? And is it going to have negative consequences to our physical health or our psychological, spiritual health? If it is, it doesn't mean we're not necessarily going to use it, but we need to be aware that there's a kind of a trade-off. So, when do we reach the point of diminishing returns? When does it become so damaging to us or our environment that the specific need that it's serving is not worth the trade? Um, Let me give you just a personal example of how this has worked in my life. I remember back in the 90s when I first started using a personal computer. Of course, everything was a PC back then. I don't remember when Apple got into the. I use nothing but Macs now, but I had the big old PC. I mean, you guys don't even, some of you remember what an old fashioned TV was like with a big picture tube and it had the cathode ray tube in it. And they would tell you, even I think back in the 50s and 60s when TVs first evolved uh, for typical households, that don't let your kids sit closer than 5 feet because there's radiation coming out of that. Well, here's one of those big, heavy monitors that you definitely needed two arms to lift and carry around. You plop that thing on your desk, and you have your keyboard right in front of it. You're sitting probably within 2 feet of that screen, which is belching all that radiation at you. And there were no warnings issued about that. Everybody was doing it. I remember a project in 2000, I think it was. It was a novel that I was writing, and I really got into it. I was really excited about it. So I had a bunch of free time at that particular point in the year. And for about 6 weeks, I just get up and sit in front of that thing and type all day. And that was when my eyebrows fell out. If you've noticed, I don't have any eyebrows. That's when it happened. I always had heavy, I was almost a unibrow guy, had heavy eyebrows until that point in my life. And that's, within months, I just lost those. And it's not something genetic because no one else in my family has had that happen. I had other things occur, and I'm not going to go into gruesome detail, but that's really when I got alarmed and I started getting interested in antioxidants, and I just became an antioxidant fiend to just consume as much antioxidant as I could. And sometimes I think that's why I'm still alive. But again, there was never any warning about that. Now, your iPad or your iPhone, they still say there's that rumor out there that iPhones can cause cancer. I don't really know if that's true or not. Here's the thing, I don't trust the industry to tell me if that's true or not, because who's going to fund a study that finds that one of the biggest cash cows in our society is actually very risky to your health? That would be economic calamity. They're not going to do any research for that. The uh, industry itself is often funding research that produces positive results. This is not just this specific technology, of course, but this has become a feature of society that's even leaked into academe. Academic departments are funded so much by grants, and so many of these grants come from private corporations and through government as well, which government has its tentacles into the money that cycles through corporate America. So, government is interested in your discovering that, oh, that's okay, there's nothing to see here. So, we just don't ever really know how much of this stuff that we're using could be damaging to us. All this talk about 5G and how we need to get on board before Huawei takes all of our business away from us. Yeah, let's catch up with the Chinese there. Although, again, the people I talk to who are not employed by government are not actively seeking big academic grants, but they're very knowledgeable, well-trained people. They tell me that 5G will just have devastating public health effects. I think that this has become public enough that I read about some vigorous protests in the British Isles against the establishment of 5G. There are going to be these stations in public places all over the place. Even if you don't have a device that operates on 5G, you're still going to be, again, saturated by this shortwave radiation that it emits. And who's going to tell us about that? There's so much money to be made, and oh, it's so cool because you can download a movie like that. You used to have to wait for 5 or 10 minutes. Oh yeah, that's worth risking uh, 20, 30 years carved off the end of your life, isn't it? Um, just here's some things I just listed that are beyond question. Carpal tunnel syndrome. Okay, we don't use the mouse so much as we used to, but that's obviously been connected with computer use. Eye strain. Amazing to me how many of my young students would come in with, especially at their tender age, to be so nearsighted. Their eyes are already very strained. Problems associated with the sedentary lifestyle, sitting in front of video games or computers, of course, obesity, but not just obesity. I think diabetes is probably connected with this because while you're sitting there, you're eating things to get those endorphins going, and you got lots of things, fats and sugars entering your system that aren't good for you. And just think of this is just really starting to be explored the way it deserves. The effect on our social and psychological well being of social media. It's a joke, except it's not really funny. It's not really an exaggeration. Have you seen two kids on a date in a restaurant, actually sitting there across the table from each other and they're texting each other instead of talking to each other? Uh, that's pretty bizarre, and yet it's not that uncommon. Or when I was before I retired, I'd be walking to my office, and kids would come out of class, and they're all doing this. Nobody would say hello to you, and I don't know how they didn't fall down the stairs every time they hit the stairwell. But severe um, restriction of our development of social skills. And this, of course, leads to, because we're not happy about not having social skills, I think this adds to depression. Suicide rates are, I don't know if they're exactly skyrocketing, they're certainly on the rise. More and more young people seem to be okay with the idea that, well, we can address this by becoming bio-robotic hybrids in the future. Let's just keep on. See, that's the kind of the quintessence of what I'm talking about. It's forward progress. The utopia is there in the future. If we just keep going the way that we're going, we're not very happy with this. It's not very good for our health. So what's the solution? Well, let's get more of it. Let's have a further technological band-aid to cover up the bad effects that it's having, and then that's going to have some bad effects. What we'll develop something technological to add to that, and after a little while, we won't even be fully human. We'll just be really sophisticated robots, and we can handle the depression and unhappiness then because we can just address it with programming or something. That's kind of depressing in itself. It makes me want to go jump in the lake when I think that people are content with the idea of just ending their humanity. Uh, we can, one of the things we can do to make our lives better is simply to, getting back to the Neil Postman thing, is just to get control of this. We don't have to renounce it. We don't have to be Luddites, but we can identify specifically what we want new technology to do for us, and we can fine tune it to address that specific need. When it starts wandering beyond the parameters that we've established, we need to back off. We need to say to ourselves, I don't need that. And you'd be amazed just how much happier that in itself will make you. But again, and this is where I'll wind up, and this is a link back to the other videos that I've made. There are forces, and it's not just corporate America. Remember, corporate America is in bed with big government too. The people making money off you and the people with power who want to pull your strings as though we're all a bunch of puppets. They both want you to be hooked on all this technology because they can control your lives. They can control what you want, what you think. Um, don't let them do that. Be free. Be your own person. Be happy.